And when I say infrastructure, I mean the background conditions and factors that determine our ability to achieve the needed types of coordination and cooperation. And this includes political and legal institutions of different kinds, such as the institutions within a nation state of a democratic kind, like Sweden and the UK, for example, but also these supranational institutions that exist today, like the UN, the EU, and so on. But the infrastructure also includes less tangible factors, such as some amount of agreement about the nature of the problems we are facing, agreement about certain basic facts about the world, or at least about how to resolve disagreements about those facts or such issues. And some amount of common ground is, of this type is crucial for every well-functioning society, of course, and for the world as a whole. And that's why this Trump talk of alternative facts and so on is so troubling and so disturbing and disruptive. The importance of political institutions has to do with the fact that when many individuals interact, they sometimes end up in a tragedy of the common style or prisoner's dilemma type coordination problems or coordination dilemmas. And many of those dilemmas are centered around public goods, and these are goods whose existence does not depend on what an individual user or person does, although it may require the support of many people, but which one can benefit from and utilize, regardless of whether one contributes to it or not. The classical example is a fish stock in a big lake or a sea. In some such cases, it may be rational for each fisherman to increase his or her catch in narrowly self-interested terms, and regardless of what the others do, even if it's also true that it's much worse for everybody, also in narrowly self-interested terms, if all increase their catch and thereby destroy the fish stock. It could be rational, it could be rational for each of them to increase his or her catch, even if it's worse for all of them, if all of them do compared to if none do. And this is the mechanism that underlies the fact that, according to a UN estimate, around 90% of the world's fish stocks are now fully or overly overfished. So a fish stock in a big lake is a public good, just as fresh air or public roads or knowledge, and of course a sustainable climate. They can all give rise to these damaging coordination dilemmas. And political institutions help us to counter them or avoid them through having other options at their disposal than those of the individuals that are, as it were, caught up in the dilemma. So the government can introduce fishing quotas and, for example, and stiff penalties for those who overfish. And what they thereby achieve is to ensure that the narrow self-interest of the individual decision makers, the individual people who fish, coincides with the common good. I mean, these fines and so on motivates decisions by self-interested individuals that jointly generate outcomes that are better for all. But perhaps more importantly, those measures also help to motivate people who are not purely or narrowly self-interested, and this includes most of us, I think, and who are willing to contribute to the common good, even if this leads to costs in terms of narrow self-interest, but only if they believe that others will do so as well. I mean, people of this kind, like most of us, I think, who accept that they have a moral responsibility in this case, or in the case of other public goods, but don't want to be kind of exploited by too many of their less scrupulous fellow citizens. So I saw this documentary a couple of years ago about some poor area in outside of Mumbai, and there was an Indian man living in poor conditions, but he was interviewed, and he was talking about his project to save up money for buying one of these small Indian cars that was on the market at that time. And when he was asked then by the kind of rosy-cheeked, middle-class British journalist is that such a good idea? Haven't you thought about the climate change and so on? So he responded angrily, well, you know, I'd be happy to stick to my bike if you get rid of your cars. So even if this guy will, in fact, he probably went on with his plans and got a car, he would perhaps have voted for a proposal that makes it more difficult for anyone to have a car, everyone, if there was such an option. And that's one of the wonderful things about politics, of course. It invokes, or it can invoke, when it works properly, the better angels of our nature, to use Abraham Lincoln's words. Now, this political strategy has proven extremely successful within nation states. I mean, if you look at it over the years, not always perhaps, but it has generated much better outcomes than if we hadn't had them. And this is because within nation states, there are political institutions that can enforce the decisions and monitor the situation over time. The obvious problem when it comes to climate change, for example, the types of dilemmas we are caught up in now, is that they go far beyond national borders. They don't recognize, they don't kind of accept those borders. They don't care about them and involve all or most of the people who live on this planet. I mean, it's not only climate, it's things like antibiotics and the occurrence of antibiotics-resistant bacteria and so on and so forth. There are zillions of these problems. And at that level, at this level, at the global level, there are no institutions that efficiently allow us to, get rid of the dilemmas. We have the UN, of course, and the World Bank, the International Crime Court, but this structure is much too fragile to neutralize the dilemmas, which is part of the explanation why we haven't reached as far as we should have. In a way, we are in a state that Thomas Hobbes, at that level, that Thomas Hobbes called the state of nature. I mean, the strong survives and exploits the weak and so on. And that's in the situation we are today. So, because at the global level, nations behave just like narrowly self-interested fishermen. I mean, they try to secure their own real interests, and there's no one that looks out for the common good, like the government or the state. So this is why my own personal activism is almost entirely devoted to promoting better global governance, as it's called, in the form of better and more efficient political institutions at the global level. And I do this in this organization that was mentioned in the beginning with a very ridiculous name, the Global Challenges Foundation. I can talk about this later, so I'm not going to say so much now. There are obviously lots of things one can do that are worthwhile, but that's the thing I've chosen. So what are the implications of these remarks about coordination dilemmas regarding our moral responsibilities? Well, when I emphasize the political sphere, and when some people do that, a common response is to say, we don't have time to wait for that, and you're just saying that because you don't want to concede that you have a private, personal responsibility also. You want to lay the blame squarely on the politicians, like you kind of illustrated here, one strategy that people uses. But I think that's a very confused response. It confuses the means we have for recognizing and living up to our responsibilities with the responsibilities themselves. The political system is a vehicle for living up to our responsibilities and for channeling our efforts in an efficient way. It's not a vehicle for getting rid of them. So what I want to kind of promote here is the idea that the responsibilities we have as individuals, as private people, they are the primary ones. And this has partly to do with the fact that we, in a certain sense, and I know this might be provoking, we have the politicians that we deserve. We might not have voted for some political party that is in power, and so on, but we could all have done much more to ensure that that party would have gotten less influence and so on. And it's important to remember here, I think, that we're quite unlikely to get politicians that are better than us. So that means that, I mean, that happens sometimes, but presently I think it's quite unlikely. And that means that we have to be as good as we can be. So another way to see that our responsibilities as individuals are primary is to realize that political institutions are also public goods. Just like fresh air or knowledge and public roads and so on. And they also generate coordination dilemmas. And the political system is also such that we benefit from it regardless of whether we contributed or not. For example, through voting or whatever. We benefit from it because we benefit from its solutions to all these coordination dilemmas we would otherwise have been caught up in. And they are also such that their existence does not depend on what an individual person does. Nevertheless, no efficient system, political system, can cope very long without the persistent support of a large majority of citizens. And this leads me to the less tangible components of the infrastructure of which the political institutions are a part. I mean, one interesting thing to note is that since individuals in many cases lack narrowly self-interested reasons to support the political institutions, for example by voting, the mere existence of them illustrates that we are not purely self-interested, of course. We are also concerned with fairness and justice and are driven by compassion and other virtues. The occurrence of these attitudes is not only a requisite for the existence of institutions, but also for their quality and their capacity to deal with the major dilemmas that we face. And this is why the political system does not relieve us from our obligations, but rather give us additional ones. We can all contribute to its quality through being part of organizations or decision-making bodies or networks and so on that work for desirable goals, for example related to the climate crisis, through voicing our concerns in all the decision-making bodies that we are a part, be it, the board of the kindergarten that your children attend, or some sports organization or whatever. And through listening to reason when we take part in the discussions we are in, and by keeping well informed and so on and so forth. And I'm serious now, by simply behaving civilly when we are out in the streets, in the subway in Stockholm, for example, or on the boat to history. And what this means, I think, in the context of the climate issue, that it's not just enough for you here to reduce your flying or meat eating or sorting your waste and similar things. We can't all be Winston Churchill, fortunately, but we should all do what he did. We should all talk about it. Finding ways to work together with others, both in national and international networks, and I can give those interested tips afterwards if you want. But by bringing up the issues in any decision-making context that we find ourselves in, for example, in the board of the kindergarten of our school that our children attend, or in academia, or in our company where we work, and so on, in our housing society. Whenever a decision made, we can ask the question, how is this? Does this have any implications for the climate? I mean, could we do that? I was a head of department in Uppsala, at Uppsala University for 7 years. And so I made many decisions, and in that context I was given instructions to look at the implications for the gender equality issue. So there was always a box to be ticked, And at the beginning I thought that was ridiculous because ticking a box is not going to change things. I think now that's completely wrong. We should introduce similar things in the case of climate, I think. And whichever decision you're taking, you will have to reflect on the implications of this for our chances of meeting these goals, for example. Exactly like what happened in Britain, I think, in the Second World War. Everything was they always had to think about how is this going to affect the war effort. We don't want people to hate us, obviously, so when we do this, we have to do it in an elegant and humorous way. So that's more tricky, of course, but persistently. How is this decision to refurbish the house going to affect our greenhouse gas emissions and so on? I also think there is some room for bragging, and also, of course, for shaming and blaming. But some people say that shaming and blaming is it's counterproductive. People are just going to be angry and so on. But that just means that you have to be a little bit subtle about it. To make you feel better about yourselves, I can now confess that I'm going to fly back to Stockholm tonight. And afterwards, Kevin is going to ask me, so you're flying back? Why is that? And I'm going to respond, well, I have to. There's such an important meeting at Uppsala University tomorrow morning. But then, instead of lecturing me, Kevin could make a joke, perhaps, or just, oh, you have to. That could also be very efficient. So that's my advice to Tersman. More seriously, perhaps, or generally, we live in interesting times, or dangerous times, in that nationalist, anti-scientific, anti-democratic sentiments and attitudes are sweeping through the world, which is already dominated by dangerous neoliberal thoughts, I would say. And the reason for this, I think, for the rise of Trump and Brexit and what have you, is that these forces have a very simple yet powerful narrative that attracts a lot of people. Law and order, make our country great again, build the wall, let's take our country back, and so on. While there is no equally powerful counter-narrative. That's sorely needed, but that is lacking. We do have, of course, plenty of knowledge amongst climate scientists and among other people. We also have very good arguments. But they are often expressed in a too complex way and without, with not sufficient amount of confidence to really move people's hearts. I don't think it's up to the climate scientists to formulate such a narrative. I don't think they are up for that task. That's not their job. And our present politicians are not going to do it as long as they want to rub shoulders with the rich people in Davos. So this is up to us. This is something we all have to help doing. We all need to do that. It could be our most important task, I think. I mean, think of Me Too for inspiration. It didn't come from a scientist, didn't come from a politician. It rocked the world in a few weeks. It might blow over a little bit, but I'm sure, and it has already had a powerful implication. So it can happen. Behavioral change, norms change can be fast if the timing is right and all sorts of other complex factors are in place. I mean, this could be our most important task. For unlike, I like this analogy with Second World War. But there is one respect in which we are in an even worse situation than they were in. Churchill ended one of his most famous speeches by saying that, we are going to do what we can and blood, sweat and tears and so on. And if we fail to resist the Nazi aggression, the new world is going to come and rescue us. The empire is going to come and rescue us and liberate us. And, of course, Spaceship Earth, there is no empire which is going to save us. So we are in a worse situation. Thanks for your attention.
you very much both. I hope you could hear Folke up there also. Was it okay? Yeah. Because I really don't think the mic was on, but you had a strong voice. So now I will leave over to Lovisa Eriksdottir here to facilitate and to continue the debate and discussion. We have heard the two approaches here, which really puts a lot in your mind, I think.
Yes. Hi. Thank you for this, both Kevin and Folke. I think I can speak for the group. You really made us think. And it's really nice. We had Kevin here last year, and you come from this natural science background, and it's really nice to have Folke here to join us from the more of a philosophical aspect on it. But Kevin, you also talk a lot about responsibility always in your talks. And you kind of always, after you hear Kevin speak, you get like a slap in the face. Oh my God, like sustainability researchers like me, I'm also fly and I do all these things. But at least we are talking about it, as Folke is saying. So I want to open up the discussion, but first I want to also ask you the responsibility when it comes to wealth and power. Of course, researchers are powerful and they are wealthy usually. But the fact is, though, that there is not only this 10%, there is also this 0.01% that maybe control 50% of all production in the world. So let us, because we are talking about it, and let us step back from our responsibility a little bit and talk about maybe responsibility in that sense, connected to power and wealth. And you also talked about the political, the responsibility of the state and the coordination importance, but it's not really working. Why isn't it working? Why can't we say, oh, we ban all plastics? Why can't we decrease? Why can't we make a fundamental universal human right list? So can we talk about this a little bit, and then we open up the floor?
You want to start?
Oh, okay. Well, I probably would borrow, I often disagree with her, but I would borrow something from Klein on this. And I think that actually we are much more powerful than we realise. And we're much, much more powerful than the 0.001%. We are much more powerful than any of the detritus in Davos. But we're only powerful if we start to come together. And the real skill of that 0.001%, either explicitly or implicitly, is to keep us divided. Because collectively we can change anything we choose to, particularly in democracies. But even not in democracies, I'm not saying it turned out to be very good, but look what happened to the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring was not driven by some great and good. The Arab Spring was a bottom-up movement. Okay, it turned out to be a bit of a disaster in the end, at least we're going through a process of it at the moment. But I think we have much, much more power than we ever realised, and we can counter the negative repercussions of that 0.001% if we choose to. But it does require us to start to coalesce more than we do now, not to run scared of them, to never be a sycophant. I don't know what the Swedish word is for sycophant. Brown noser. We have a number of expressions in the UK for them. What do you use for a sycophant? Someone who always, we have a lot of rather unpleasant expressions in the UK for this, who always curries favour, sucks up to the wealthy, the well-known, the celebrities. There's a lot of that in our world where people won't speak out because the other person's this great person. And there are no great, I've never met a great people, personally. I'm 55 years old, I've met lots and lots of very good people, which is basically everyone I've met. I've never met a great person. So I think if we can, don't be sycophants, be much more courageous, try and be more collegiate, work with our colleagues and push harder, I think we are much more powerful than that 0.001%, whatever it might be.
What do you say, Folke?
Yeah, I agree with what Kevin said here. I also want to say one thing, or many things actually. I mean, politics is of course above getting together, you know. So we have to work together, and this is an important way to do that. So, and if you look at the types of distributive justice issues that you bring out, of course, within good democratic states, equality is often they are often more equal in many respects than in other types of countries because of the political system. So these aims go hand in hand, I think, climate crisis, poverty, and so on and so forth. And then I also want to say that the political system, you say, doesn't work, or you kind of interpret me perhaps. But I don't like that negative story all the time. I think the EU, for example, has accomplished a lot. The UN has accomplished a lot, and so on and so forth. And we have to focus on those things and not forget about them just because we have problems now. Because then we will miss the opportunity to use this system to help out in the, or change it to help out in the present context. So it's very important to have that narrative as well, that these structures have really helped us. Positive, I think that's important. Another thing, I mean, a big problem, and Kevin kind of touches on it, is that we have psychologically, I think, a status quo bias. We are in this situation, and when we try to assess the types of strategies that are available to us, we are too narrow-sighted. We can do so much more. We have the power to do so much more. I mean, let me take a simple example, the smoking ban. So it was introduced 2005 in Sweden. And I remember that spring, I was still smoking a little bit, and people were talking about it and said that, you know, this is never going to work. All the restaurants are going to shut down, and people are not going to meet partners any longer, and the population is going to dwindle, and so on. And then, the 1st of July, I think, they introduced it. The day after, everyone was really happy. You know? So behavioral change can be quick. It's just that we need leadership. And look at California, for example, who have taken many initiatives and still do it, like a, you know, of this kind, usually followed by others. It's just that we need this courage, and and we, as individuals, need to say that we want the courage to the people in power.
But the one thing on that, I think we mustn't just think it's the people in power aren't just them.
No.
That we are the people in power, exactly. And it's up to us to exert our own power today. We can be the leaders. The leaders aren't the great and good out there. They might be, but they're also us as well. We work in partnership, I think.
Absolutely, I totally agree with that.
Okay, so now I open the floor to you guys. Are there any questions?
Oh, come on, there must be some questions.
There must be some questions, right? Yeah?
Disagreements?
Nuclear power.
No.
You're an engineer.
No, I'm like.
So, yeah, I guess I maybe just need to say 2 words, nuclear power.
Yeah.
And then what are your thoughts about that? Because, of course, there is no carbon dioxide emissions.
Right, as an academic, I remain agnostic about nuclear power. From a climate perspective, there are lots of reasons not to like it from a sustainability perspective. There are lots of other reasons not to like it for lots of other reasons as well. And I should hasten to add that I used to live next door to one. My dad worked at one for years and died as a consequence of working in a nuclear power station. But I still remain agnostic about it now. I often get asked about nuclear power, and I can go into all the maths behind it. You can't solve climate change with nuclear power. You can't build them fast enough. It only provides just under 2, or around about 2% of global energy comes from nuclear power. Even in Sweden, it's not a high percentage. Because remember, it's electricity, not energy. But the other thing I think we have to sort of think about with nuclear, well, you've got the build rates and so forth that make it really, really challenging from a perspective. But if I was to make a sort of priority list of what I would do to try and respond to climate change, it would start off with, firstly, and I think this works from a sort of a time frame point of view, behaviours and practices and norms, you change those first, they can be changed. They can deliver something. They're difficult, but they can deliver something very rapidly if they need to. Do those first. You then move to efficiency. That's like a technical efficiency of appliances, laptops and cars and so forth, which can happen quite quickly. You then move from that to, well, what do we do about the supply side? And I would go through the renewable options first. You look at these wind, solar, tidal, wave and so forth. Then I would go to biofuels, but very limited and indigenous only. So I wouldn't be importing them or exporting them, only indigenous. And then you sort of think, well, if you've now still got a big energy demand, what do you fill the gap with? You either have to reduce your demand further or find something else. And if there's nothing else there, I would rather use nuclear than fossil fuels. So nuclear is the one I would least like to use of the suites of low carbon technologies and behaviours and practices, But eventually you get to a position whereby if you cannot meet your energy demand and you're not prepared to move it down any further, then nuclear might be an option then. But that's where I would see it. It's always above fossil fuels, but it's always below all of the renewables and probably just below biofuel.
I agree.
More questions? Yeah.
Hi. I wanted to ask you, what is the reason or where it comes from, this maybe fear to speak the truth and the need to be polite and to put it in a good light when we need to maybe do a critique? Because, for example, if you go to the doctor and you're sick, he's not making you tea and pastry and say, you know, we have to talk, we have a little problem. No, he will straight tell you, you have, I don't know, whatever, and you need to treat it. That's it, and you go out to the pharmacy or to the wherever you need to go, and you start treating it. And why we cannot assess in the same practical and effective way these sorts of issues? So, for example, you as an expert in the field, why can't you go to the politician and say you are an idiot and incompetent because it's not working what you're doing, or it's just no good? You have to change it, and so why do we have this lack of courage? Mm-hmm. And why do we question?
Before we could talk about the IPCC's communication, for example, and you are better placed to do that. But could I say something? I do think doctors are not that straightforward. I remember John McCain, that's his name, right? The senator from Arizona. He got this diagnosis of brain tumor, a very dangerous form. And the doctor said, well, we don't really know about and so on. And so McCain could sense he couldn't tell the truth. And then after a while, McCain just put down his hand and said, I'm a grown-up man. I can take it. And so you had to really prompt him to give the truth. I think it has to do with, obviously, what these psychological explanations, but I think it's interesting that at the IPCC, which obviously assigns a lot of importance to, carefully scrutinizing the evidence for this and that and so on. When it comes to policy questions or these kind of sociological, psychological things, they just use their intuition, and they believe that it's more efficient to perhaps cover up a little bit than not to do it. But what's the evidence for that? Have they really assessed that in a scientific way and so on? So a lot of this communication is not based on reason and evidence and so on and so forth. And I don't know what's the most efficient way to get other people to do something, but they should at least consider it before they are just using strategy. That's my point.
Yeah, building on the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has different working groups. And the working group 1, which is just basically the science, they go out and count molecules and look how they react with each other and add them up and other few technical things. But it's all basically Newtonian physics. And that pretty much does a good job of doing Newtonian physics. It's not complex, it's just complicated. There's just lots of it. And I think that's quite okay. But you go to working group 3, and that's about mitigation. In other words, what should we do about reducing our emissions? Now that suddenly becomes amazingly political. And the people involved with that, whether they're scientists, the engineers, the economists, I think are hugely biased. And actually, I would remove working group 3 from the IPCC because it already constrains our imagination to think about what the solution space might be, because it's always the same every year. They produce that, every few years they produce their reports. But I think one of the reasons we're not honest is part of it has come out of a slow evolution. So in 1992, the Earth Summit, we could see how to solve climate change with the usual technocratic solutions. So if you like, the tools of the right, a bit of a light carbon tax, a bit of regulation. That would have worked. But we didn't do it. So in 1994, the challenge was a bit more difficult, because as I said before, it's a cumulative problem. You've got a carbon budget. Every year you fail, it gets much more difficult the following year. So by 1994, it's failed. By 95, so now it's a bit harder. Well, we need a slightly higher carbon tax, maybe a little bit stronger regulation. By the time you get to 2017, you've got no budget left at all. You're completely stuffed. You've got to say, basically, stop flying, stop driving, turn your fridge off, and stay at home. And that's a difficult message. But we got to that point because every year we would not be quite honest. And because the problem is exponential, because it's cumulative, then you end up with the position we're in now, when we basically have to lie or make up negative emission technologies to hold together the narrative that we've had for very good reasons that we started in 1990. And at some point, you've got to step outside that and say, I'm sorry, we were wrong for 20 years. And that's quite hard to do. And so I think we're in the position we're in today, and we'll come up with every scam we can, rather than actually say, we got it wrong. And I've talked regularly to scientists who tell me that, I know that we can't do this, I know that's not right. Some very well-known Swedish ones you may have heard of who work on particular planetary boundaries and so forth, who will say in public certain things they would not say in private. And a lot of scientists are like that. And my view as being an academic, I came from the oil industry to be an academic. And my view of an academic, we have two jobs. One is to do our research carefully and diligently, and we get it wrong from time to time and to admit it. And the second is to communicate it bluntly. And that's all we have to do as academics. And courteously. I think we should always be courteous. We can be direct, but we should be courteous. But we're not there to be liked or disliked. We're just there to that's our job in our society. We're not there to spin things, we're just there to be direct.
Yes. We talk about evidence and fact-based and straight communication and so on. But I was just thinking, I watched this when the French President Macron, he was interviewed on Swedish television, and he said that we live in a crisis of imagination. So I was thinking, okay, we have these facts and so on, but obviously that doesn't really help. So maybe what we need more is imagination. So can I just have your comment on that?
No, I think this is just consistent with what we have said. I mean, we need to be creative and innovative, as you said. And there are mechanisms that slow us down. This bias towards the status quo, we kind of have difficulties in. But where is this going to come from? I think it must come from everybody. And I don't think, scientists play an important role, but I think we need narratives from other people who can come up with, Macron is a good, make climate great again. That was a good idea. We need people who do that, and we can be these people who do, and we have to recognize that and look at all these. A lot of people are kind of thinking about, what can I do? I'm just a single guy, I'm not terribly resourceful, and so on. And so we have to stop thinking like that and look at examples of people who did stuff that changed the world. Take Me Too, for example. One woman goes out and says, has anyone else had this experience? That's a fantastic thing. That was not an academic studying gender equality or, according to this theory here, blah, blah, blah. It was someone who was in tune with people's thinking about these issues. That's what we need to get imagination going, I think.
And I would agree with that and say that I think as an academic who works on the science side, I try and communicate quite a lot with artists. I don't know very much about the arts and so forth. I enjoy listening to things and watching things and so forth, but they're much better at communicating than we are. Scientists are absolutely good. I like PowerPoint slides. I can't see why the world isn't convinced by a few graphs and some PowerPoint slides, but it clearly hasn't worked. So I think we need to engage with playwrights, people who write the soaps on television, people who write songs, with authors. We're really good at writing dystopias. Just look at the dystopias that are out there. Have any of you read any Aldous Huxley, Brave New World? Quite famous. Well, if you read his other book, Island, which is about his utopia, it's awful. And we're really bad at writing utopias, and we need to write about better futures. They may not be utopian, but good futures, interesting futures, ones that we can imagine being in. And I think we need pluralistic messages. There's not a single message of what a good world looks like. There are multiple messages. I have friends of mine who lean quite a lot to the, well, not quite a lot, a little bit to the right in politics. I disagree with them about lots of things. They're good people. We need narratives that appeal to them. We have lots of narratives that sort of appeal to the left, but we need ones that also appeal to the right. So we need to engage with the whole constituency of people who are much better at communicating and reflecting the world than we are. So I think that's something we should try and do. Well, certainly I am as academics and as natural scientists, we should engage a lot more with these people. My concern at the moment is most of the artists I engage with are sort of what in the UK we would use, because we're a very class-based society, we'd call it highbrow. They write plays or they do abstract art, which 4 people get to see. But what we need to be doing are things like engaging with the soaps and with the magazines and so forth. And the other thing is to actually not always talk about climate, to talk about other things that have the climate is embedded within them, but not to just focus on climate. And there's quite a lot of work that suggests if we can talk about other things that climate has a component of, then we're more likely to get the message across than talking about carbon dioxide and showing graphs.
So could I just illustrate the bias towards the status quo shortly?
Mm.
In a funny way. Some psychologists did this study. They bought some ugly coffee cups, a number of them, and then they had a group of people, and they divided it up in two groups. And in the case of the one group, they just gave them each a coffee cup, and in the case of the others, they offered them a choice. Would you like to buy this cup for $1? And most people said, no, it was an ugly cup, they didn't want to do that. But then they asked these people in the group, that, these people who had received the cup, and said, can I buy it back for $1? And they said no. The majority said no.
Yeah, that's a well-known thing in economics. The difference between willingness to pay and willingness to accept is a factor usually of about 6. And they should, in theory, they should be the same.
I think that's and that captures something very important here.
Well, a man I met on Western Samoa once, he told me that for 300 years ago, about the time before the European arrived, the people were living as they always have done, and they had the small gardens in the forest, on the hillsides. They were cutting firewood there, and they were using the forest very hard. And once in a while, the chiefs went out and looked at the hillside and said, "Oh no, this can't go on. The forest must repair itself." So they declared for a taboo. And nobody went there. It was completely without any human hands for 15 years, and then the jungle growed up again. But when the missionaries arrived and made Christians of them, they declared that the word is given to us by God, and you're welcome to use it. And then the locals, they just went out to the nearest tree to cut their firewood, and that was normally alongside the riverbanks. So they got a huge earth erosion on top of that. And, I mean, isn't it very, very similar to what we are dealing with here in a bit? That with the responsibility between the government and the individual. And I think that lots of these problems that we are dealing with have to do with that the major philosophy of our time, the liberalism, have a lack there. There's a hole in it. Because these invisible hands of Adam Smith is not working. It's so focused on to create growth and to create creativity of the people to create growth. This to consume less, to travel less, this is just in the opposite direction. We are not... we are very hard to take that task. How shall we create a welfare society if we should think about growth in another way? I'm not sure if that was a question, was more of a reflection.
They are also allowed reflections. Yeah. But do you want to comment on that?
Well, we were at an event yesterday on economic growth, discussing that issue there, and someone pointed out, and I think probably we're all aware of this, there's a new phenomenon. Economic growth wasn't talked about before the Second World War, and to be quite honest, most of us weren't talking about it or seeing it on the news till probably the 1980s. And it's a nonsense concept. I mean, we don't talk about astrology or reading our future in the tea leaves in our cup on the news, but we do have people talking about the economy. It says in Sweden, it says in the UK, the Dow Jones index was down by 0.4%. Irrelevant. What on earth are you telling me that for in the news? We've developed this whole way of living around this astrology, and it is a little like the Ides of March. We should take absolutely no notice of it. That form of economics has nothing to tell us about system-level issues, and yet we've embedded it so deeply in our society. These people are completely penetrated into governments and into our companies, and I think have absolutely nothing to offer. Our economies work despite the economists, not because of the economists. So I do think we have to... now, that's not been a little unfair. They might be okay for very small level issues. And the theories behind modern forms of economics, market economics, are about small change. So they might tell you about if you've got one shoe shop competing with 3 or 4 other shoe shops on the high street, they'll tell you something about which one's going to be more successful. But they can't tell you about system level issues, changes between countries, and all the other things that we're facing with big challenges. So I do think we have to move away from that economic framing. But also I think, and some of you may know much better than me on this, talking to my anthropological friends, is that we've not seen this concept of growth in a lot of our history. We haven't anticipated it. This idea of progress is quite a new thing. I mean, the Romans lived very similar lives. They just expanded the model over very large geographies. The Babylonians did something. The Egyptians went for 4,000 years. And for 2,000 years of the Egyptian period, the pyramid period, their society was so similar you could take someone out at the beginning of that and put them in the end of it. Imagine taking someone out of our society from 2,000 years ago and plonking them in this lecture room. They wouldn't recognise it. It's a completely different world. And yet that hasn't happened in the past, if you like. So it's only really post-Enlightenment we've seen these sorts of rates of changes, and we've normalised them, that this is what humans always do. Now, humans have always done something. They've expanded, they've done different things, but they haven't developed like we have, nothing like it. And particularly when we've got sort of 7.5 to 9 billion people, possibly, doing the same thing, I think is really problematic. But this all comes down to much more to culture, back to your thing about when the missionaries turned up, they saw nature as raw and red in tooth and claw, and they had a different attitude towards nature. It wasn't one of stewardship, it was one of dominion over. And I think the cultural dimension, the philosophical dimensions here are hugely important, and we're all influenced, much though the hardest scientist is influenced, even in doing their science, by philosophy, by culture. And I don't think we really realise how deeply embedded culture and philosophy are in who we are. And if we're to solve the problems we need to face now, we need to go back and rethink those philosophies and cultures. So although I work on engineering and all the sciencey stuff, ultimately I think the solutions to these sorts of problems that we're facing, these systemic problems, are much more deeply embedded in philosophy and culture than they are in technology.
Yes, of course. I mean, the invisible hand. I mean, this type of prisoner's dilemma mechanism that I talked about in Traveling with the Commons is kind of the nemesis of the idea that the invisible hand works always and everywhere. So, and it's a powerful argument for coordination through politics, of course, and democracy, and even Adam Smith actually realized that in some of his writings. But I would like to give you all an invitation. I mean, we need to think new about this and culture and philosophy and so on. And the Global Challenges Foundation, which I'm a part of, we advertised a huge prize for institutional reform at the global level. This was a year ago, and we are going to award a prize of $5 million, which is too much, of course. And we have received 2,708 entries from almost 2,000 teams all over the world, and they have ideas about what to do, how to improve the UN, for example, how to establish new types of institutions and so on. I can't tell you about all these ideas. Some of them are really, really interesting, but I'm involved in the evaluation process. But we are going to advertise the winner in May. After that, we have put them all in a database that is searchable for everybody. And we are going to have another competition. And we invite everybody from all over the world. We had submissions from all continents, well, not Antarctica, but all of them, from rich and from poor, academics and these highbrow people, but also from people working at a low level in some labor union, or whoever could participate. And in the second round, what you're supposed to do is to look through this database, see if there's something that's interesting, trying to improve it, add it together with something else that you might find in the database, or that you might discover yourself, and so on. And then we will have more prize money, if that is what motivates you. I hope not, of course, but in this way we hope to get more discussion going about how to make a political system that kind of matches the magnitude of the challenges that we are in today. I mean, at one point the nation state was an innovation, and democracy, of course, it wasn't an obvious thing, why shouldn't that process go on so that we can, like the welfare state has done, has succeeded in our countries, to improve the situation for lots and lots of people? Why couldn't we establish something similar in the world? We need to, and we are going to, I think, ultimately, unless we kill ourselves first, which might be a good thing, I don't know, I mean, new species could come. But I invite you all to just look out for this, take part in the competition, and you know, utilize this database and all the resources we are going to provide.
Good. Thank you, Folke. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Folke. I want to get back a little bit to personal problematization. Considering two great or good, truly good talks on whether personal responsibility for action or responsibility for talking about the issues, I still think, what is this force, this missing element, which would actually force people getting out of the room and finally deciding, yes, I'm not going to buy an animal industry product which contributes to climate change, or I'm going to, for real, change from a diesel car to a bike, or I'm not going to every Sunday buy a piece of clothes from another part of the world, etc., etc. What is that force which actually would make people to go out and not to think, oh, I really like this critical researcher, like he's really great, or not being motivated by, oh, I'm going to get this great idea and get money to that idea, buy a big house, a big car, and be cool. What is actually this thing missing which would people listening after this, getting all the facts, getting inspiration, and make them change something? Is it the fear of not belonging to the bigger group of society? Is it our addiction to comfort? Is it just lack of prototype of how actually different behavior looks like? Just from your opinion.
I mean, obviously lots of things are going on, but make no mistake, lots of people are doing exactly what you're saying. They are selling the diesel cars and buying bikes instead. That's happening. Not as fast as we want, of course, but it is happening. What makes some people not do it? I think that, again, bias towards the status quo, we think we are going to become less happy if we, you know, instead of prioritizing our material wealth, we are going to prioritize working together for some good aim, for example. But that's not true, I think. But we believe so, partly because we are induced to believe so, I think, by the culture we're in. I mean, because you're worth it. I mean, every day you get this message from all the advertisements that you see, for example. Every day, almost, you know, round the clock, you get this message that the only thing you need to do is to consume more. So obviously that's going to be difficult. I think a driving factor is going to be esteem or coolness. You know, when you see that your peers do this, and you see that, you know, no, I'm not going to fly any longer. I'm going to sell my car. It's going to be like a snowball. You know, and it's going to be ridiculous to be the one who has a car while all the friends are having their bikes. We just need to get that process going. I think that's, I don't know if it's a very honorable motivation, esteem, to be esteemed by your peers, but I think it's going to be an important one. I think that's I think is a fact. And we can get that snowball moving. It has already been started.
Yeah. I think I'll just build on that. I think it's the same. I would pretty much everything you're saying there. So I think we can do that. You know, those of us who are trying to make these sorts of changes, we need to coalesce with other people doing it, to make small groups doing it, to make it actually to become something that you can aspire towards. I don't really think that people doing some of the things that I think a lot of times in life we do things much more from habit and practice than because we think we're going to get happy from it. I think we go out on a Saturday shopping, whatever it might be, if you start to get that world, because that's what we normally do. But actually, when you really unpick that, is this shopping part what's really important, or is actually, I mean, I wonder how many people go out shopping on their own or meet up with a friend. And if they meet up with a friend to go shopping, is it actually the shopping that matters or meeting up with a friend? So you sort of unpick these things. What are the things that really motivate us to make us enjoy our lives? And my guess is probably spending time with our mates and our friends, having a beer, in my case going cycling or rock climbing, whatever it might be. There are these things that make our lives happy and worthwhile. And we need to find out ways that we can pursue those. And I think sometimes these other bits that end up with the consumerism around them and the bad things are just a mechanism by which we do the things that we actually enjoy. But But if we can start to do these things that are low consumption activities, so coalescing with a few other people, and I think universities are great places for that, because however you may look at it, and we're often, often people sort of joke about universities being elite places as ivory towers and so forth. They are still really important in our society. And I think that there are lots of very good things come out of universities. And if you think historically, of course, that's been the case. You look at the opposition to some things like the Vietnam War, that wasn't driven by the great and good, that was driven by students, very significantly. Not always by students, but often by students. So I think universities could be showing leadership again. I think probably part of the problem is because they have become commoditized and market-oriented places, that it's sort of lost some of that vibrancy. But I think it could get that again. And that's incumbent really upon, I wish you'd say it's like to be incumbent on people like us, but I don't think it is. I think as you get older, you struggle to fight against the status quo. I think there's more of a natural tendency when you're younger to see the flaws in our system. So I think it is incumbent then on sort of your generation to be putting forward alternative visions. I don't really want to say exactly what they should be. I'd rather you come up with them rather than me come up with them. But then don't wait for me to give you the power. Get together with your colleagues and take the power. So I think that will set up new norms, new things that people will aspire to. You'll become the person that set up these cool mechanisms that other people enjoy, or ways of living that other people start to follow. So I do think there's this debate about we have to have some confidence in ourselves to demonstrate leadership. And I use the example repeatedly. So some of you may have, when I was here before, I've used this one. That there was a cashier, not even at universities, a 17-year-old cashier in Ireland called Mary Manning, who refused to put apartheid goods through her till. And so she was sacked. But because she was a stroppy woman, she got outside with some billboard posters and said that this shop, the biggest shop in Ireland at the time, has South African goods during apartheid. And so the union joined her a few weeks later. Within 6 months, the shop no longer stocked apartheid goods. Within 2 years, Ireland had changed its government legislation. So a 17-year-old had brought about a change in legislation in the government within 2 years. And in 2008, Mbeki flew over from South Africa and put a plaque, sadly he flew over from South Africa, and put a plaque on the outside of Dunn's door, just thanking Mary Manning, 17-year-old Mary Manning, and her union for helping making their contribution towards apartheid. And I think we have to remind ourselves that actually, that's where leadership often comes from people doing unusual actions. So getting together with your other colleagues and painting out a new future, and not one that we probably prescribe, because ours probably is not the right one.
Yes.
Sadly.
Yeah, we have another question. Great.
She looks very dissatisfied with that answer. You are dissatisfied with it? Oh, yes. So I thought you looked very dissatisfied.
Okay. First of all, I would like all Swedish members, or what's it called, citizens, I want to encourage you all to take part in a local party. I'm a local politician, and I have to say it's quite easy to become one. So that I would like you all to become, because we need to have these issues talked about in all political parties, because then we get something going, I think. And then I would like to ask you if you had any tips for Gotland, what we could do with what the politicians on Gotland can do, because I think we have done some things in efficiency in buildings and so on. But yeah, what ideas do you have for us?
I think that's.
Well, actually, maybe it's as much Jesse Schreier, my colleague from Uppsala. We've been looking, and was Rickard? Oh, Rickard as well. I couldn't see him, hidden behind a jumper. So Rickard as well. So we've been looking at what other things that someone like Gotland could do, and from discussions before when we've been here. I mean, the great thing about an island is it's a wonderful place for experimentation, because the boundaries really help. So you could be doing lots more. The other benefit, of course, is not just an island, but it's a very wealthy island. Now, it's not that well flies in and out with its yachts and its holiday homes, but there's also the people living here as well. Wherever the local, what you call yourselves if you live in Gotland, Gotlanders. Is it? Oh well, I'm not trying to butcher that. My pronunciation's not that good. But anyway, so I mean, you're in a really good position that you could. And there is already this discussion about could you become independent or self-sufficient for energy. Now, whether you should be self-sufficient or not, or have a decent cable backwards and forwards to the mainland is a slightly different issue. Perhaps you should do. But there's no reason why you couldn't be using lots more renewables. I find it really strange. I come to Visby, I look at the energy curves for when the energy demand in Visby goes up. It's obviously during the summer. and yet there's not a solar panel in sight, hardly a solar panel in sight. You could pretty much meet all of your summer demand, I would think, for certainly for electricity, from solar panels in and around Visby, yet you have none. And I think it's either the warmest, the sunniest, or the second sunniest part of Sweden. It's quite windy around here. People keep telling us how windy it is around here, yet almost without hardly a wind turbine in sight. So there's a whole load of renewable options that you could be having here, along with energy efficiency improvements. Now, okay, it's hard for a British person to tell the Swedish people about energy efficiency, but Sweden's still got a long way to go in terms of energy efficiency. Obviously not as far as Britain, we're a long way back. So be much more efficient, be using the renewables, but then also think about how people in Gotland could have sort of smarter energy systems. So it's not just about having the renewables, but using your energy more carefully. So if so the timing of this, all technical stuff, the timing side becomes really quite important. If you've got intermittent renewables, and everyone wants to have the washing machine on at the same time, that's a problem. So you have to find some ways that you can actually have different households and companies sort of having dynamic relationships with each other. Now that can be done via technical things or through other arrangements with sort of habits of how you do what you do in Gotland. You don't have rush hours here, but lots of the world have rush hours. Why do you have a rush hour? Because everyone's got to be work at 9 o'clock. Well, why not have work change from 1 to 9 o'clock? They start from 8 o'clock till 11 o'clock, and you have a wider period of time. So these sorts of dynamic issues are really important, but they're all quite dry things in separation. But someone like Gotland could be coming up with all sorts of things to become pretty much within 20 years, I would have thought, almost completely renewable energy, including the ferry and not the plane. And including the cement industry. Do not close down your industries. The industries are really important. If you close it down, you'll just import it from somewhere else. So they need to be made really low carbon as well. But that requires, you said your opening bit about politicians, about getting involved, it does require the people in Gotland to get involved, or probably 20% of them, at least, to be vociferous and make a noise. So I would have thought there's lots of scope for Gotland leading within Sweden. And as someone who's come from the UK to Sweden, I think Sweden's a really progressive country that should really be showing some leadership within the EU. So Gotland could be demonstrating leadership to Sweden, Sweden could be demonstrating leadership to the EU, and quite rapidly the EU could be demonstrating leadership at a global level. But it does require someone at the start, and why not Gotland? Lots of renewable potential, wealthy, thoughtful people. Why not make it start here, rather than waiting for someone else to lead? So I think there's lots of scope for Gotland to make a shift.
Plus, improve your public transport.
Yeah.
I have a summer house in the south of Gotland. It's really hard to get.
Well, perhaps that's the problem. I've got a summer house in the south of Gotland. It's really hard to get there. I think Churchill will tell you have to sell your summer house.
I don't see any hands now, but I actually have. Yeah.
Well, we're happy with your questions as well.
I want to continue on this with what we could do, what we could do on Gotland, and maybe also other places, and maybe to Folke especially, to what kind of support can be given for this empowering of people to continue the snowball effect, so to say. I mean, you say we have lots of power, also you, that we have power, but then we should see more. I mean, Me Too is something really special. Could we see a good climate too, and then this? I'm not sure, but what kind of support should be provided? And
no, I think it's we have to. I mean, maybe we're both middle-aged dinosaur academics, me and Kevin. But what did Joe
I'm
Hill
even
say?
older.
What did Joe Hill say when he was convicted? And he was killed. This labor person in the US. He said, "Don't mourn me. Organize." I mean, there's no alternative to that. We have to work together. And not just sit at our home and sort our waste or something like that. We have to get out there, and there are unlimited possibilities of doing that now through the internet. There are all sorts of networks and fun things you can do, and also just forming a group here, and we are going to do so and so and so on. So and of course we can. The society can provide help. They used to do that. Maybe they do it. You can get contribution for the coffee and stuff like that.
Yeah, coffee is important.
But organized, there's no alternative.
Yeah.
You have got elections coming up as well, haven't you?
Yeah. This fall.
You've got elections. In the moment, you've got a group. You've got a Green involved, Liberal Democrat.
Small Green.
Small Green. Well, make them bigger. That's you've got
Make
elections.
them bigger.
You've got. Oh, well, I'll be very careful. We're talking to ones very recently, but I mean, yeah. So get engaged, and that is coming up. That's a time for really driving change. If you think these people, if you agree with the people pushing forward sort of reasonably progressive agendas, then push them really hard. They'll probably want to put more progressive agendas forward, but they need support.
That was the last.
Yeah.
Okay. We don't have that much time left, but we have 2 questions here, and then I want you, Karen, to maybe wrap this up.
Thank you. I want to go back a bit to the Paris Agreement.
Yeah.
We noted that the UK and Sweden both use some experimental calculations to cover up for their emissions.
Yeah.
Can we agree that the Paris Agreement is basically doomed to fail? Just because the bigger and more wealthy countries are more slacking in their approach towards emission reduction. Like for example, with the LNG terminal that they're building, the same with the Port of Rotterdam is building a large terminal for LNG, which is basically the gate for Europe. Like these rich countries, they should actually be the pioneers in sustainable development and reduction of emissions. So therefore my question would be, is the Paris Agreement in this case doomed to fail just because those rich and powerful countries are basically slacking behind?
I did write quite a lot about the Paris Agreement because I was quite heavily involved in trying to get it, making comments on the drafts and so forth. It wasn't doomed to failure. And if you ask me 2 years from now, if we don't make some significant changes, then I think it will fail. I don't think it'll be possible to achieve anymore. It was achievable at the point it was put forward for 2 degrees centigrade, as given a technical issue. I don't think 1.5 was achievable. But there were lots of good, strong political reasons for having it in there. So I think that there were already lots of discussion, sort of quiet discussion going on amongst the scientific community that 2 degrees C is not possible. We will have to go for 3 or 4. And the 1.5 degrees C framing in the Paris Agreement has pushed people back towards 2. So politically it was really quite important. But yes, it is true that the wealthy countries every country is failing, not just the wealthy countries, but the wealthy countries should be leading by example, and that's embedded in the Paris Agreement. But those countries aren't just things called countries. They're countries made up of people like us. So where are the people demonstrating around the LNG terminal, potential LNG terminal? I know the fracking in the UK has been significantly curtailed because every time they're trying to do anything, they have about 500 people chaining themselves to bulldozers. And actually, I know that genuinely works because it happens to be that the CEO of Quadrilla, the main company in the UK that's pursuing fracking, that he and I used to work offshore years ago. And we've got together quite a bit now to discuss fracking because I've been really opposed to it for science reasons. And he says the biggest opposition to him developing fracking is actually all of the people turning up, all the dirty, unwashed people that get their camps, turn up, chain themselves to the bulldozers. That is a massive cost. And so they've cut back on some of the places they're going to develop simply because they can't afford it. And so let's see in our own countries, if our countries are failing, that's because we, the electorate, are failing, not just because the politicians are failing. So let's see ourselves bolted around the terminal in Gothenburg or in Rotterdam. We are seeing some of this. You see some of the people invading the coal mines in Germany, but they need to be doing it almost day in, day out. Make it so it's so costly they cannot do it. Yeah. And civil disobedience is something that I get asked about this. Is that a good thing to pursue? Well, actually, we are all being civilly disobedient here. Carrying on with the status quo is civilly disobedient to the poor people going to suffer the consequences. So there is no civil disobedience route. So we just have to choose which one is more morally appropriate. And I think I don't do this because I think as an academic it would undermine my credibility if I have any at all. But I think we need people to be chaining themselves to infrastructure, to make it difficult to do things. They have a really important political message to make, and that message needs to be made because democracy on that level has actually failed. So you're part of a democratic process by actually engaging. So it's not yet failed completely, but it's not up to the politicians, it's up to us. Well, it's up to us. If it fails, it's because we have chosen to let it fail.
Do we have one more question?
Well, the last it's not really a question, it's more a self-marketing moment that I've chosen. Here on Gotland, we have established something, it's called Let's Talk About It, and it's a meeting that we do. It started between the master students in the various sustainability degrees, and we now have bachelor students, and in the last meeting we have also guests from outside the university, and we went to Uppsala, and we are starting to build something bigger, a community that really talks about sustainability and how to make it happen. And 2 months ago I stand up here in the sustainability talk and said that I had this idea, so it's really grow up. We had 5 meetings now, and we're building the 6th, and we want to make a sustainability festival or whatever in June to promote this idea of Gotland as a sustainable campus and so on and so on. So I would like to invite everybody of you who did not sign or check it out yet to we have just one Facebook page, which is the main role. It's called Let's Talk About It, and do check it out, and especially the politicians and the outsider of the university are welcome. And I think
are middle-aged professors welcome?
They are especially welcome.
But you have to sell your house first.
Well,
we can have a meeting there also.
We have had a really long but good discussion. I actually went to Let's Talk About It last Saturday. It was really nice and fun. And we talked about this, we talked to Robert Hall, that lives in this Echo village here. So that was really interesting. But before I thank you guys, I'm not really satisfied. I have one question left. And that is, because Alicia talked about the force, you know, and you say you have this romantic idea that we have the power.
No. We can take the power if we want.
Yeah, we can take the power. Yeah. But then Folke had this really interesting example about the smoking ban. The smoking ban was also in Iceland, where I come from, so I know it quite well. And in that case, we didn't all just decide for individually to stop smoking. There was this force that was needed to tell us, everyone, you are not allowed to smoke here anymore. Folke didn't stop smoking until he was told to do. And this, I think, and this I was trying to ask before also about power and who makes the decisions and where does that come from? Because I often think that if we are too focused on the individual power, that we forget the decision making that actually happens. And I want to ask, what are the ethical implications and the implications of forcing us to stop doing this? Like, for example, ban plastics, or, you know, why is that so difficult?
I don't think, can I answer?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I don't think it is so difficult. I mean, I think it's much more difficult, unlikely that people will spontaneously give up things that they like. They're much more unlikely to do that than to vote for a law that says that they should stop doing this. For example, combustion fees in Stockholm. People they voted for it in large numbers, even if they spontaneously wouldn't have reduced their driving. But they like to these rules because we are like Ulysses at sea, you know, he bound himself through this
to the mast, yeah.
And so on. But also because we think that we have an obligation, but we are only prepared in many cases, some of us, to live up to that obligation if we know there is a guarantee that others have to do it as well. Because we share this responsibility, and that's why legislation, rules of this kind are so important. But they are still a means for us, as individuals, to see to it that we live in a better and more just and more morally appropriate society, this structure. That's why politics is so very important. And the smoking ban, it came from, I think, was it California or whatever? I mean, it's a dynamic, of course. If a political body, for example, takes an initiative, others adapt. But the force must often come from beneath and we put pressure on the politicians so that they have the confidence and courage to pursue this agenda. So it's kind of a dynamics. They should change our behaviors and our attitudes, but we change them as well. So it's a kind of virtuous circle.
And that's my point about the individual. Although I talk quite a lot about the individual, I always try and point out that it's the individual matters because they are the catalysts that drive political change. Political change virtually never comes top down. It almost always starts bottom up. Someone had an idea, they tried it out, and maybe it worked, and it spread a little bit, and it gets seen by other people who talk about it. And eventually policymakers think, that's a good idea. I doubt a policymaker thought, let's ban smoking. My guess is there were probably all sorts of people who were arguing for not smoking. There might be some doctors arguing for it. There might be other people who go out night clubbing like me who really hated it because I like to dance quite vigorously and breathe deeply, and I couldn't because of all the smoke. So I always objected it really strongly when I used to go clubbing years ago. So there were lots of people, no doubt, arguing for it. And then that again coalesced in a sort of emergent random fashion. And then it takes some policymakers with some leadership and some courage to push that forward. But the individual, we as individuals, are absolutely pivotal in that, in driving those changes. And they are much more emergent. There's no clear Newtonian path you can draw for it. So it will pop out all over the place when you try and do things, when you try and change things. And so don't. I also say to people, when you try and change something and it doesn't work, it's only not worked because you haven't seen it work. You don't know where else it's come out. You'd have no idea where your idea might be appearing somewhere else in the world within a few days. You just don't know. So don't expect to be patted on the back and saying that's a great idea, because it's not how the world works. It's emergent. But have the confidence to try things differently for good reasons.
Thank you. I think that those were really good last words. We should all take this courage and confidence and do something. Not only talk about it, but also do something. I want to thank Kevin and Folke for coming. I'm going to give you gifts. They are flight tickets too. They are from Krenku, which is a Visby tea store. And it is rather... nothing is sustainable, but it has like a box. Yeah, it's like a box that you can use, reuse, for example. Thank you. So, and thank you all for coming. And if you haven't signed the list that is going around here, please do so. It's really important for us to get your name and how many came. And if you want to put your emails. But thank you so much for this.